So welcome to Matchback Systems podcast. I'm Heather Pearl. It's a pleasure to welcome our guest today, Mr. Dick Craig. Dick has many years of experience in container shipping, and I know it's going to be really interesting to hear his opinions on the industry and its challenges. So welcome, Dick, and thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. So it would be great to start with your industry background. Can you tell us a little about your career history?
Sure. Yeah, I actually started way back in the late 70s, recruited out of business school to the Southern Pacific Railroad. So a couple of years there, went over to, in San Francisco, went over to American President Lines across the bay. It actually done some work on the intermodal side at SP. That led to APL, 23 years there, largely in, started in finance, yield management, logistics, and marketing. Had the pleasure and the opportunity of two overseas stints in Hong Kong in the early 90s. In Singapore after NOL, the Singapore company bought APL, 2000, 2001. So a great opportunity. Also, what doesn't exist anymore, an American-run company. Opportunities there that maybe aren't quite as available for U.S. executives today. So it was a good opportunity. Went over to MOL, Japanese firm, in 2003. So had a little over 15 years there. Most recent 5 years as the president and CEO of MOL America. So kind of had a broad overview and responsibility for sales, operations, customer service, and all the administrative functions. While in that position, I was on the board of OSEMA, the Ocean Carrier Equipment Management Agreement, working on chassis issues, chassis industry, and CCM, Consolidated Chassis Management. It's a industry-owned pool operation in much of the U.S. So very deeply in the chassis realm during my time with MOL. As people probably know, the three Japanese carriers merged their container operations last year. So that was kind of an opportunity for me to move on based on some of my involvement with the chassis. And when NACPC, the North America Chassis Pool Cooperative, was started, a consortium of trucking companies, MOL was one of the early supporters. I thought, gee, that's really a great concept. So when with the J3 merger, Dave Manning at NACPC asked if I was available to do some work for him, and I said sure. So currently, for about the last year now, I've been affiliated with NACPC in a business development role, and a lot out there. It's a lot going on, and quite exciting at the moment.
Yes. So thanks, Dick. So
Sure.
Based on all that experience, what aspects of the industry interest you the most now? What are your supply chain passions?
Well, I think what's going on with the challenges in the major ports, Los Angeles, Long Beach, prime example, but a lot of the issues elsewhere. So the big ships come in, and everybody's well aware, I think, of the alliances, the ever larger vessels. My reference earlier to an American-run company, APL, for so many years, I think was sensitive to the, let's say, a lot of the logistical challenges in the U.S., the operating challenges. Decisions now are really made overseas on a larger scale, more distantly removed, and they don't always understand the ramifications of some of the things that are done. So large ships are showing up, have been for some years, getting larger, and without necessarily all the land side capability to keep up with it. And you're seeing the chokes in the at the ports, whether it's in the terminal, whether it's at the gate, whether it's the rail, whether it's trucking capacity or chassis.
Right.
The land side isn't keeping up with the vessel side.
Right. So that's an industry bottleneck at the ports.
Right.
what can be, in your opinion, what can be done to relieve it? What are the solutions?
Well, I think there's a tremendous number of things that could be done. I did have, in my last year or so with MOL, I participated on FMC Commissioner Dye's supply chain innovation team, and it was very interesting. Really good effort to get key stakeholders involved. One thing there was Gene Soroka, Port of LA, was rolling out his the GE portal. It's data. There's all the information in the world is there. Ocean carriers have it, BCOs have it, and so forth. If you can put that in a platform, you can see what's coming at you 1 or 2 weeks. When a vessel leaves Hong Kong, ocean carrier knows what's on it. You've got 10, 12 days before it gets to the West Coast. You can gauge from a terminal when it's going to be, in rough terms, when it's going to be coming off a ship, when it's going to be available for a customer to pick up, when a chassis needs to be available, when a truck needs to be available. All this stuff can be planned further out rather than seat of the pants. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to smooth things out if people know when their freight's going to be available, plan accordingly. Matchback systems here is a tremendous opportunity. There's just a tremendous amount of waste with empties passing on the highway between the imports and exports. If you can match the street turns, match an import with an export without the box going back to the terminal, getting out of the terminal, you're taking gate congestion out of the terminal, potentially a huge amount of it. You're taking truck moves off the highway. You're reducing stress on drivers, the driver shortage that we're seeing now, and it's a winner for the environment. So there's a lot here that can be done. Another one has been talked about is rail shuttles. I mean, there's a tremendous, in Southern California again, a tremendous amount of cargo moves out to the Inland Empire. If you could get cargo moving on the rail, avoid the gates, move it out over at night or something, you could get a lot of cargo that's not tying up the gates at the terminals, it's not tying up the highway, it's not tying up the trucker needs. So that's another opportunity. Now, the railroads aren't interested, it's not cost effective for them, but I think if you looked at it from a macro standpoint and from all the stakeholders, something like that could perhaps work out. You just have to work around how the costs are shared and make it fair to everybody. So a lot of things that could be done here, I think, to chip away at the problems and improve the situation.
Do you think everybody's in the mood for more collaboration, whether it's, particularly on?
I think some parties are. Not certainly everybody talks about it. I think you see, so the ports, again, Port of Long Beach and LA, and I'm just using that as an example, but you've got similar situations up and down the East Coast, up and down the West Coast. They clearly want to see things improve, but you start digging down deeper, well, maybe some ocean terminal, maybe some ocean carrier, marine terminal or some ocean carrier thinks they've got a competitive advantage, and it's not worth in their particular interest to share with everybody else and be part of a larger solution. So I think that's one of the challenges. Not everybody, each individual party is necessarily incented to be part of a broader collaboration.
Yes, because they have their own interests to look out for.
Yeah.
Right. Now let's talk about chassis, since that's the most recent experience at Intre. So what's going on in the wonderful world of chassis pools?
Well, going back about 10 years ago, the ocean carriers decided to, several of the ocean carriers anyways, to try to, quote unquote, get out of the chassis business. The United States is unique relative to the rest of the world, where traditionally the ocean carriers provided the chassis. Almost every other country, it's up to the trucker to do so. And there's just historical reasons that it developed the way it did. But with the increasing complexity, with the alliances, with changes in safety rules that the federal government imposed about 10 years ago, and the carriers really don't have the control over the assets, so it just doesn't make sense for the ocean carriers to directly be providing the chassis, as was the case before.
Okay.
So the fleet was sold off, and to largely three private companies that now control the vast majority of the chassis out there. And while they're well-run organizations, they're not necessarily, they're acting based on their profit motive, not necessarily for the benefit of the common good. And you can have situations where you're not necessarily keeping the chassis, you're not necessarily wanting to spend money on repositioning, you're not necessarily wanting to spend money on M&R, on maintenance. The chassis fleet is getting a lot older. It isn't getting renewed as the way it should be. And there's really not any, let's just say, benefit for the common good. There's benefit further below.
Right.
The CCM has been an attempt by the ocean carriers to get through that. And while the chassis are provided by individual private companies, they're managed on a pool basis for an overall regional level. But it's had mixed results. In some places it's been supported well, in some places it isn't, and it's really only east of the Rockies at this point. So you've got this asset that's relatively low cost compared to the rest of the supply chain, but if the chassis aren't in the right place at the right time, you've got dislocations, and that's what we've seen a lot, again, in Southern California as well as in other parts of the country.
Yes. There always seems to be concern about shortages of chassis. I mean, the answer clearly isn't just to add chassis.
It's not necessarily a shortage. It's having them in the right place at the right time, also, okay. and in good repair and in good condition. And again, if Ocean Terminal A is deficit, but Ocean Terminal B is fine, but the common good might say you're going to have to position out of Terminal B to Terminal A. Well, two problems there. One is somebody's got to pay for that repositioning. And two is Terminal B has to give up the chassis. They might be comfortable, but not to the point that they want to give up some of them and maybe run things a little tighter. So there's no overall management that says, well, you really need to reapportion and put some more over here instead of some over there, and have a cost apportionment to do so.
Right, because it struck me, chassis splits. Can we talk about chassis splits for a moment? Because I was reading about that, and there seems to be a strong similarity between empty container moves inland and chassis splitting at the terminals, which creates, 2 extra stops for truckers. Yep. It's a waste of time.
Yep.
I'm interested to know, is there anything that's being done to address that, or what more can be done to tackle that issue?
Well, we'd like to see neutral pools established. This is what NACPC is really striving for. It is a consortium of trucking companies. If you have a neutral pool, one chassis is like another. You don't have to use a blue chassis. When a green chassis is available, you could just use whatever chassis are available to you. We're also a strong advocate of choice. A lot of certain ocean carriers require a use of their particular affiliate or the chassis provider that they're doing business with that may or may not have a good supply of chassis right at hand. And a truck, if it's a merchant haulage move, the trucker and the BCO might or might not have a relationship with that particular chassis provider. So we'd really like to see have a neutral pool, fairness between carrier, but for the merchant haulage to be able to use whatever commercial arrangement they want to, but have the assets managed overall on a neutral basis. So they're managed for the benefit of the supply chain as a whole, as opposed to a few for-profit parties that may not be managing from the broader picture.
Okay, interesting. So do you think North America will ever have a standard across all the ports? I mean,
I'm not sure you need a one-size-fits-all standard. Say Chicago might be a little different from Southern California, might be a little different from Miami, Florida, or something like that. But I think in general, regional neutral pools that reflect the operation of that geography are something that is likely to be developing over the next few years as the parties see the benefit to do so. You've had a situation in Norfolk, Virginia that's been a port-run pool now for some years. That works pretty well. Maybe that's the model for other places. So there's different ways it could go, but I think some kind of neutral pool, some kind of management on a regional level of the chassis assets as a whole is something we'll be seeing more of in coming years.
Okay, so that brings me to my last question for you.
Sure.
So look, say 5 to 10 years out in the future, how do you think things are going to be different in the industry? Do you think that we'll have a smoother supply chain, more collaboration, some innovative measures we haven't seen yet? What are your predictions for the future, Dick?
Well, I think a lot of these issues we've been talking about here are going to get gradually resolved. I mean, we've had over several years now the introduction of ever larger vessels, consolidation in the industry, consolidation in the alliances. I believe, at least in the North America trades, that's largely getting played out. You're going to get somewhat larger vessels to come, but you're getting to the point where it's going to have peaked out. So you're going to have the chance for the terminals, for the land side to catch up. And that's going to be improvement in the ports. You're seeing, some terminal development in LA and Bayonne, New Jersey, and so forth with the rail there. So these things are going to be catching up with the vessels. Again, like the GE portal, the benefit of better information. Many ports, they're not all working using the same product, using the same supplier, but a lot of terminals have similar initiatives underway. So you're going to have better information. And we've been on a run of huge import growth here, as 30 years now. That's probably, whether it's a good thing or not, at least it's going to stabilize things as far as the challenges we've been facing here. So I don't think you're looking at double-digit growth, annual growth in imports anymore. Those years are gone, and it's going to allow time for the landside infrastructure to catch up.
Right. Well, it's certainly exciting times, Dick.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sure.
Yes. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Okay.
Thanks very much for sharing your views. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.